This is a video demonstrating how to slip the first stitch of a row knitwise and purlwise. So we've got a little sample of stockinette stitch fabric here, and on the right side rows we're going to slip the first stitch knitwise, and on the wrong side rows we're going to slip the stitch purlwise. So starting out, when you're slipping knitwise, that means to put the right needle into the first stitch on the left needle as if to knit and slip the stitch off. Then you knit the rest of the row. Then for the purl side, it's a little bit different. You turn the work. And now we're looking at the reverse stockinette stitch side. You slip the first stitch of this row just straight across from point to point. That's slipping purlwise, and then purl the row. What this does is it creates a slipped stitch selvage that is often used in heel flaps, or many times you'll see it in association with garter stitch, so that it's easy to pick up stitches from the edge of the work. It creates this chain selvage that you can see down the side of the knitting. That's on the first stitch of the knit side. This is the first stitch of the purl side. What makes this easy for picking up is that you can just put your needle right through the slip stitch portion and pick up a new stitch. So some things to know in order to finesse this: when you're slipping the first stitch knitwise, you slip it as if to knit. Then when you put your needle into the next stitch on the left needle, pull up on the working yarn. That snugs this first stitch, the slipped stitch, so that it makes a nice tidy slipped stitch, not a big loop on the edge of your work. This is especially important for heel flaps because that's the area where you're going to be picking up the gusset, and it will leave gaps between the stitches if the slipped stitch is too loose. On the purl side, what you can do is, as you slip this stitch purlwise, needle tip to needle tip, then you go to place the right needle in the next stitch on the left needle, tug the yarn as you make the first purl stitch. That tightens up that slipped stitch. Now sometimes you may get confused about whether you should be slipping the stitch knitwise, slipping the stitch purlwise. Let me show you why you do it this way. When you're slipping the stitch, what you want is a untwisted chain of stitches down the side. So when you slip the first stitch on a knit row knitwise, what you're doing is you're making this an untwisted slip stitch. Can you see that? Whereas if you slipped it over this way, purlwise, point to point, when you turn it, you're getting a twisted stitch. Can you see how that makes the stitch clip twisted? And that would make a not such a tidy edge. So also, when you're slipping knitwise, you always slip with the yarn in the back. So you slip the first stitch knitwise with the yarn in the back, knit across the row. And then let's take a look at the stitch, the first stitch, the slipped stitch on the purl row, and examine that to see why you slip it needle tip to needle tip. So here we are at the beginning of the purl row. Now when you're slipping purlwise, you slip with the yarn in the front. You start with the yarn in the front and slip tip to tip. If you slipped as if to knit, and you look, you can see that it twists that first stitch. If you slip as if to purl, you can see that the first stitch is not twisted. Also, if you have the yarn in the back and you slip, you end up with the purl bump on the edge and not a slipped stitch. So you hold the yarn in the front, slip as if to purl, tighten up the yarn on the first stitch on the left needle, and work across. This gives you nice, tidy, slipped stitch salvages on both sides of your work. And there